So for this lecture, we will be learning how to write a if-then statement inside of VBA. And as for the logic, it's very similar to the if function inside of Excel. For this video, we will be working inside the if-then sheet tab. So make sure you have this sheet selected. So for this example, our goal is to insert a grade in cell C2 and then use a if-then statement inside of VBA and display a message box saying if this grade is a passing grade or a failing grade. So within our writing VBA code module, let's add a new sub procedure. I'm just going to come down to the bottom here and type in sub and then give this sub a name. I'm just going to call it grade score and press enter. Now, like I said before, using variables inside of our code is very useful and it's good practice. So let's create a variable that will store the value that we enter in cell C2. Well, the first thing that we have to do is declare our variable. So we need to type in dim, then give the variable a name. I'm just going to call it my cell. And then we need to specify what we want to declare this variable type as. Well, for our grade, we know that we are going to enter anywhere between 0 and 100. So we can just declare this variable as an integer. So now that we have declared our variable, we need to set our variable equal to something. So we can type in my cell equals, and then we can put range C2. So the value that we insert into cell C2, our variable myCell will store that value. Now it's time for the if statement. Now the if statement is great for performing certain lines of code based on if a condition is met or not. So let's say for our if statement, if the grade that we insert into cell C2 is greater than or equal to 65, we want to display a message box saying that this is a passing grade. So the way to type that out within our code, we need to type in if, and then we can use our variable, which is my cell, because my cell equals to the range C2, and then we can put greater than or equal to 65. And now we have to tell Excel if this condition is met, then what happens? So we need to type in then press enter. And I'm going to indent this line of code by pressing the tab key on my keyboard because it gives our code a little bit of a cleaner look, and we can easily tell that this line is inside of our if statement. So if my cell is greater than or equal to 65, then we want to display a message box, open quotes, and then we can have it say, you passed, close quotes. And to close out this if statement, we have to press enter, and then I'm going to outdent using shift tab on my keyboard, and we have to put end if, and that's it. So if we come over here to our workbook and type 80 in cell C2, and then come back over to our grade score sub procedure and run this sub, we get a message box saying you passed. So we can click OK. But now if I change this score to a 60, which is below the 65, and we run this sub again, nothing happens. So now let's expand our if statement to a if-else statement. So within our code, any value that's greater than or equal to 65, we get a message box displaying you passed. So if the value is anything else, we can put a message box saying, sorry, you failed. So what we can do is add a new line underneath the message box, and we can type in else. So anything that's not greater than or equal to 65, we can display a message box saying, sorry, you failed. Sad face. Then close quotes. And that's it. So basically, like the if function, if the value in our cell is greater than or equal to 65, then return true, which is the message box saying you passed. And if it's false or else, display the message box saying, sorry, you failed. So currently we have 60 in cell C2. So if we run this sub, we get our message box saying, sorry, you failed. We can click OK. And now if we change this grade to an 85, run our sub, we get the message box saying, you passed. So that's the if-else statement. Well, currently, we only have one condition, which is greater than or equal to 65 or not. Well, inside this if-else statement, we can add an else-if, which will allow us to have multiple conditions. For example, if we put 90 into cell C2, we will just get the message box saying, you passed. But let's say anything that is greater than or equal to 90, we want a message box saying, congrats on the A. And that's where the else if will come in handy. So right below the line that says message box you passed, we can insert else if, and then state another condition. So else if my cell is greater than or equal to 90, then add a new line, then have a message box saying, congrats on the A. But we are not quite done. For example, if I put 92 in this cell and run our sub, we still get the message box saying, you passed. Because our first if statement says anything greater than or equal to 65, produce the message box saying, you passed. So what we really need to do is add a and if to this first line. We just want this message box you passed to display if our grade is greater than or equal to 65 and less than or equal to 89. And then anything greater than or equal to 90, produce the message box saying, congrats on the A. So in the first line of our if statement, right after my cell is greater than or equal to 65, we can type in and my cell is less than or equal to 89, then show the message box saying you passed. So let's try this out. If we run our sub, now we get the message box saying congrats on the A, because inside of our cell we have 92, which is greater than or equal to 90. And if we change this to a 75, run our sub, we get the message box saying you passed. And anything else that doesn't fit those conditions, which is anything below 65, so if you type in 58 and run our sub, we get the message box saying, sorry, you failed. I know this was kind of a lot, but hopefully breaking up this if statement piece by piece helped you understand the logic a little bit better. And before we move on to the next video, I do want to point out why using a variable in this case is so useful. For example, anywhere in our code where we used my cell, we could have just put range C2 and not even declare a variable. But let's say in our workbook, the cell that we entered our grade changed to B5. Well, if we use range C2 in different parts of our code, we would have to change that range to B5. We can just change our variable to equal range B5. So it's a lot easier to change it once instead of going into your code and changing everywhere where you use that range.